It has now been a full week since Election Day. A week later, we still haven't had the president-elect decided. There has been many unnatural occurrences, a lot of evidence of fraud. But really, we already saw this coming from way back earlier in the year. We knew this was going to happen. There are many things happening all around the US that shows evidence of fraud. Many quote-unquote coincidences happening that are just unnatural occurrences and statistically impossible in elections. And of course, all these oddities that are happening just so happens to favor Joe Biden. First off, and the most obvious, Joe Biden got a drastic increase in votes only in the swing states. If it was really mail-in ballots, then we would have seen the same thing all across the US, but no, this is only in the swing state. In charts that depict the growth of votes for both Trump and Biden, we see that Biden has a vertical line in the chart, which is statistically impossible to achieve. That means that hundreds of thousands of votes came in for Joe Biden and only Joe Biden. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that every vote had a 50% chance of being for either Trump or Biden. Then do you know how statistically improbable, impossible even, it is for Joe Biden to get over 100,000 votes consecutively for only him? Even that alone is head-turning. And only in these swing states there are an irregular number of votes only for Joe Biden, with the down ballot not even filled out. Pennsylvania has over 98,000 of these Joe Biden only ballots. Georgia has 80 to 90,000. Arizona has over 42,000. Michigan has 69 to over 110,000 votes without a down ballot. And Wisconsin has over 62,000 votes without a down ballot. Only in these swing states are we experiencing these abnormalities. These spikes in votes happened in the middle of the night, around 4 a.m. in these swing states. And around the same time, 4 a.m. in these swing states, we have video evidence and eyewitnesses saying that they saw people with coolers or briefcases dragging them into buildings where votes are being counted after the counting had been closed for the night. Any normal person could see the correlation between these two events. Another weird thing that's been happening is during the election counting, vote counters that were a part of the GOP were asked to leave the room where the votes were being counted, so that only the Democrats were counting the votes. Why would the Republican Party need to leave as the votes were being counted?
They have refused to let us have a meaningful view of the vote count. They have continued to count the votes. Because they have done nothing to help us, they are not letting every legal vote count. They are letting anything come in. They are not letting us look at anything at all. Nothing.
Vote counting is supposed to be bipartisan for the sake of no voter fraud, so kicking out one party clearly is a red flag. It's illegal even. In Pennsylvania, a judge had to order them to allow these poll watchers because they were kicking them out. And when they were allowed, they were kept at a distance of 25 feet. How could you see what's on a ballot from 25 feet?
They put up, it looks like a police barricade all the way around the perimeter, and they are keeping our poll watchers back approximately 30 feet, at least 30 feet. You can judge for yourselves. They would not let them look any further.
Another abnormality was in these voting places, they would board up the windows so no one from outside could see the counting. At one point, Wisconsin was one of the deciding states to swing the election either way. In Wisconsin, there have been over 3.2 million votes cast. Wisconsin only has a population of 5 million, which means because that population includes children who can't physically vote, almost every single eligible voter voted in Wisconsin, which we never ever see happen. Almost 90% of everyone that lives in Wisconsin who was able to vote, voted. That is just unheard of. During the 3rd, while the election was still going on, we were seeing a normal turnout of voters. But after the election was supposed to be closed, we saw a huge spike in voters, making this the election with the highest voter turnout in history. Donald Trump got more votes than he did last election, and he still lost somehow. Biden broke the record for most votes of any presidential candidate in history. How is that possible when you could see at his rallies almost no one shows up? It's almost impossible for Joe Biden to get a full crowd to turn up to his rallies. So how does he get a record number of people to turn up to vote? Joe Biden must have such a way with words, because even dead people and pets decided to vote for him. There have been multiple ballots in the names of dead people and pets, and many duplicate ballots have been found, and all of them were ballots that were supporting Joe Biden.
With the Election Integrity Project California, they found in LA County more than 277,000 questionable ballots were mailed this election year. That's 63% of all the questionable ballots mailed statewide. It includes more than 4,800 duplicate ballots mailed to the same person and 728 ballots mailed to people who likely have died.
Another quote-unquote weird thing that happened during the election, there was a certain program that some places were using to count the votes. Apparently there was a glitch in certain counties where a couple thousand votes were misread and changed from Trump votes to Biden votes.
Pointed to a software issue in Antrim County. It showed Biden had the majority of votes, but in reality, Trump won the county by several thousand.
And these counties that use this software need to closely examine their results for similar discrepancies.
If this program was used all over the country, who knows how many votes were changed from Trump to Biden? And this glitch, quote unquote, only changed votes from Trump votes to Biden votes. Talk about a coincidence, huh? And with all of these things happening, where even still today, a week in, we have certain states that didn't officially lock in their candidate. They're saying that they ran into many problems because of the times, or many problems counting the votes because of these unique circumstances. Then how come only the swing states are having problems counting the votes? California and New York, the two most populated states, and New York, who got hit the hardest with corona, how come they didn't have any problem counting the votes? How come those two didn't see a spike in mail-in ballot? As soon as Biden started leading, they locked it in right away.
Vote on time. We did not have our votes counted on time. It wasn't even COVID. We didn't have our votes counted on time. A week later, they flip it to the Democrat. Mind you, this year, why does Arizona have a problem? New Mexico didn't have a problem. Utah didn't have a problem. California did not have a problem. Texas didn't have a problem. Colorado didn't have a problem. Nevada has a bunch of fraud, but at least they had keep counting, and I don't believe that they had a problem with stop counting and all that stuff. Maybe not. But you're talking about like 5 states, major states with a higher population count or a similar population count to Arizona had no problems. They counted straight through. There was no drama, but Arizona had a problem. Why is that, ladies and gentlemen? Fraud. Fraud is the problem.
It just doesn't make any sense. With all this evidence laid out, it's clear to anyone that something's at least going on, and there's definitely fraud, definitely worth investigating. But these media outlets are calling it, saying Joe Biden won already, he's the next president, and many Republicans are losing hope because, oh, Joe Biden won already. This map, this electoral map that you're seeing today with Joe Biden winning, that's an illusion. That's a fabricated map caused by all of this voter fraud. We shouldn't give into the illusion. It's not over yet. The Bible said what's done in darkness will come to light. We have the evidence for voter fraud. We will get the actual, real results of this election.
We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
In addition to all the evidence and claims of voter fraud and irregularities with the election, let's go back to how this ridiculous set of circumstances was made possible by the scheming of the Democrat Party, the leftist Democrat Party, the cousins of Communist China Democrat Party. What I'm about to explain is a setup of what you could call an etiquette trap. An etiquette trap is where you are pressed socially to accept the wrong in order to remain in good standing with the facts and your conscience. You wind up having to say something disturbing. An example of this is being criminalized or reviled for saying all lives matter. The truth is, if you're a Christian, you know all lives matter. But you are not allowed to say all lives matter in the political climate, in the PC climate. In the PC culture, you're not allowed to say the patently obvious all lives matter. That is an etiquette trap. If you say what is actually conscientious and proper according to fact, you are set up as the enemy. Well, let's see how President Trump was set up by this year's events in an etiquette trap. First of all, the Democrats set up the false impression that Joe Biden was likely to win the presidency. They did this through weighted polling, the same method that they used in the 2016 election, where Hillary Clinton was seen as being in a stronger position than Donald Trump. A weighted poll is when they poll more Democrats than Republicans and then publish the results as if they polled regular citizens randomly. If they polled regular citizens randomly, then you would get different results. But if you poll Democrats, of course you're going to get Democrat candidates as the projected favorite. In this climate where, the Democrats used AstroTurf social unrest. In other words, the hired team called Antifa. The trained Marxist, Black Lives Matter, joined forces with Antifa to give the appearance of social unrest. Then, in order to guard against being dealt with as for their criminal behavior, they set the president up in another etiquette trap where if he goes in and does what he needs to do, he'll be called a dictator. Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. So what President Trump brilliantly did was left it in the hands of the states and routinely asked governors and mayors if they wanted help and intervention from the feds. Seeing the spectacle of street protests, people start thinking that there is a revolution that's got that top-down, bottom-up quality that Van Jones had always talked about. You can have a successful revolution if the politicians, the political class, and the street class, the street activists, the grassroots, are working together. Well, allowing Antifa to stay on the streets promoted the idea that there was a grassroots uprising, and there must be some rationale to support all these people's ironclad resolve. This is how they play a psychological game on the entire country. There was no ironclad resolve of independent people that have a rationale that you can't shake a stick at. There is no rationale. There was just political will of whoever paid Antifa. This person has been paying Antifa ever since Occupy Wall Street in those days. They needed to upgrade the Antifa and their tactics in order to have the bottom-up effect. But it was just AstroTurf. Third, the Democrats use social media and their friends in social media, the presidents of Twitter, Facebook, Google, which runs YouTube, to maintain a high level of fear of COVID-19. State governments were recording motorcycle accidents or whatever kinds of death as COVID deaths. This got the numbers up to 200,000, where the actual deaths for COVID couldn't possibly even be that high. But the greater numbers you hear dying from COVID-19, the greater likelihood that you'll adopt an attitude of fear. The second tactic is that they censored the doctors who were showing that there are remedies that are over the counter or easy to procure with a simple prescription that could solve whatever problem you may develop with COVID-19. So if remedies are out of reach and harder to get, then that does something to increase the level of fear that COVID-19 is a bigger problem for more people than it actually is. There were a group of doctors who came out testifying that they use certain remedies that have been around for a long time that helped against malaria and other kinds of viral infections, and that they had gotten good results, yet we were disallowed to even hear their testimonies by social media. The third is marketing COVID phobia by mandating masks. The more you see people walking around the streets, the more you believe that your fellow citizens are adopting fear as a norm. Many of them were not adopting fear as a norm. Many of them were only wearing masks because it was mandated. These three tactics, mandating masks, blocking doctors' testimony of simple, successful remedies for COVID, and ginning up extra COVID deaths, created a climate of fear. This climate of fear justified a lurch towards mail-in ballots, which had already proved to be difficult to keep honest, difficult to protect from fraud. The idea that out on the streets everyone is upset with the status quo, and the idea that everybody's set to vote for Joe Biden because of the weighted polling. So the psychological fix was in. You were never going to easily be allowed to support Donald Trump without you looking like you supported an uncouth person. President Trump has been the victim of these types of etiquette traps from before the 2016 election. So here we are at a point where most people think that it's cool, and the majority are justified in voting against Donald Trump, a man who's blessed this country immeasurably, blessed black people immeasurably, Hispanic people immeasurably, the economy, the recovery, everything. That it's okay to discard this man because you don't like him. So finally, President Trump is in the hot spot again. The nice thing for him to do would be to concede, but it's absolutely ridiculous for President Trump to concede when everyone saw fraud in their faces. What does the divine principle suggest about the situation that President Trump is in? It suggests that President Trump should not leave his position. The divine principle says that there are four fallen natures. These fallen natures were acted upon for the first time in the Garden of Eden. The first fallen nature is the failure to see from God's point of view. Lucifer didn't understand why God made human beings. But that's okay, because God doesn't have to tell one of his servants what he's doing. Lucifer then decided that he didn't want any part of it, and he didn't even understand fully what was going on. So he left the reality. God is the absolute reality. So he departed from God's will, the absolute reality, and made a will of his own. That will, apart from the absolute reality, is the first form of delusion.
Lucifer, who left his proper position due to his excessive desire, and Eve, who wanted to open her eyes and become like God before the time was ripe, formed a common base and began give-and-take action.
He then invites Eve to join him in that delusion. But he has to sell her on the delusion first. And what does he say? He suggests that God is in some kind of a diabolical plot to cheat Eve. He is withholding divinity from her because God told her not to eat the fruit. The principle suggests or says clearly that God was only waiting for Eve to mature and understand the meaning and the purpose of the fruit before he gave her his blessing. And Lucifer, not knowing that, not understanding that, coaxed Eve into eating the fruit, which meant becoming sexually active, for the express purpose of spiting God, who had been withholding divinity from her. Lucifer said to her, "Don't you know that the day you eat, you'll be like God?" Throughout human history, lies have been put forward. And it's human beings' responsibility to believe them or disbelieve them. Whenever human beings show faith in truth, things get better. And whenever human beings place faith in a delusion, things degrade. We know with our own eyes, and so does the president, that the election was stolen in the wee hours of the night. There's a flood of evidence. So the principal has always said that we need to pass a test, one like Adam and Eve failed to pass in the garden. This is why President Trump should not concede. He should not ever give life to a delusion. He must do a full court press. He should try every legal means at his disposal in order to refuse, as a son of God, to certify that which is delusional. As long as President Trump refuses to kiss the ring, there's hope for America. Hold your ground, President Trump. You have the power to certify a delusion. This delusion will fall apart with your defiance. Just like Jesus refused to turn the stone to bread, he refused to jump from the temple in the second temptation, and he refused to bow, even if it meant all the control of all the kingdoms of the world.
The divine principle says, Satan brought Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple and challenged him, saying, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down." Jesus referred to himself as the temple, and it is written that Christians are temples of God and members of the body of Christ. From this, we can understand that Jesus is the main temple, while the believers are like branch temples. Jesus came as Lord of the temple. Even Satan had to acknowledge his position. Thus, he put Jesus on the top of the temple. When Satan dared Jesus to throw himself down, it meant that he wanted to usurp Jesus' position as the Lord of the temple by enticing Jesus to fall from that position to the lowly state of a fallen person. At that moment, Jesus answered him, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God."
Stand up for what's right. Do not empower a delusion.